Okay, Charles Moscowitz here. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Tracy Beanz is my guest. She's the founder, editor, publisher of UnCoverDC, which is an independent journalism outfit. Tracy, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks. I just want to, it's uncoverdc.com, just so people go to the
Thank
right
you.
place.
Okay, uncoverdc.com. No, this is great. And just before we get into it, I want to mention that I'm very pleased that you're doing what you're doing. It's good to see journalists going out there investigating. We've had a shrinking of that in recent years. I think as the newspapers have been consolidating and laying off staff, and I hope to see, if we can't have investigative journalists looking at corruption and political issues, then this country's in big trouble. We need that, and that's very important. So
I agree with you. Thank
Yep.
you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's why I started doing this. I was always a journalist, just not like this.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, I hope you can do it in a way that's sustainable, and that's important.
thanks.
Tracy, so you're working presently on the issue of the beginning of the pandemic, the beginning of the virus, and how this whole thing came about. We've heard lots of stories. The general conventional story is that it emerged out of these so-called wet markets in China, in Wuhan province. What can you tell us about that? What is your research showing?
Well, the CCP lied about the beginnings of this virus. That's clear. We don't have to go through that. It's obvious that they've now traced their first case back to November 13th. And I'm not even believing that. I think it was obviously much, much earlier than that. And what we're seeing in the data, every year, the CDC tracks the beginning of flu season or flu season in general. So how it works is you go to the doctor because you don't feel well, right? You tell them, I have a fever, I'm achy, my throat's hurting me. They have a certain set of criteria they use to classify what they call an influenza-like illness. So your doctor does a swab to find out whether or not you have the flu, right? Because now we can treat the flu. We can treat it with Tamiflu in most cases if you want. So they send that test to their laboratory. Those laboratories do the final test, and then they send the results to the CDC, and they send the results back to the doctor. And the CDC culminates all this information by working with the state health departments. So let's say you live in Texas, your lab will send that information to the state of Texas. The state of Texas keeps their own information and then transmits that to the CDC. The CDC then gives this out. It's open source. It's there for everyone. You can go to their website and you can see this for yourself. And they track when is flu season starting and which strains are out there. Is it influenza A? Is it influenza B? What's going on? So this past year in 2019, flu season, they were saying, was starting way earlier than ever before. And if you run the numbers and do a pivot table, which we did, you can see in certain states specifically, flu season began very early in November, because you can start to see people going to the doctor and that line going up like this of how many people went to the doctor and got tested. When you drill down into that data from those states, you see this disparity between positive influenza cases and no influenza detected. So negative and positive tests. And the negative tests were getting well, you've got a virus. We don't really know what it is, but this is how you treat viruses, because it's basically the same across the board. Lots of fluid, vitamin C, rest, etc. And we started seeing that across the country. So it started off Washington State, Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, a little bit of North Carolina, the Southeast, and Washington, an outlier. After that, it started to kind of spread and balloon out from there very early. Right. So you could look at how many cases in 2016 versus how many cases in 2019, and the trajectory that picture takes as you're looking at the data plotted, and see something was going on in early November. So I wanted to figure out, how do you pinpoint what could have happened here and why, right?
Well, before you do, I just want to ask a clarification.
Sure.
Did they know that this was what we now call the novel coronavirus, or is it just seen as a conventional virus?
They had no idea it was the novel coronavirus. Right. This was not even a blip on the radar here in the United States at that time. China didn't even start really welding folks into their homes until December. So they really didn't know. And then even in December, there was no test here to test for it anyway. And there was no confirmed cases of it here. So we were going under the assumption that we didn't have it here.
And what you're talking about then is the novel coronavirus. We just didn't know what it was. It hadn't yet been named. We didn't understand, the nature of it. It just looked like a conventional virus, and also that there were no tests. Now, the administration has been roundly criticized for not having enough tests. And from what I've read, the CDC actually was about to purchase tests in January, but they decided not to because they didn't feel they met the standards or they were not good tests. What's going on with that? I mean, how do you, what should they have done otherwise?
Well, it's interesting. I just published a piece yesterday from one of our reporters, Celia Farber, about the PCR test, which is the test that most places are using to find this virus. And it's, the creator of that test never meant for it to detect virus. It was mainly to isolate and replicate virus, to produce it. So that's a whole nother interview. And I'm not even the one you want to talk to about that. But okay. The testing, if you don't have a precise test, you run the risk of having false positives and false negatives. And with a virus as contagious as this, that is widely unknown, but we at the time, they were projecting death rates way far greater than the flu. Right. You don't want to have that because, you do want people to be careful about how they're interacting with one another and what they're doing. Yeah.
So why didn't at the time this started to come out and it was all published by the CDC, as you say, this is a matter of public record as early as November of 2019. Why didn't the media pick up on it? Why didn't the administration pick up on it? Why didn't the states pick up on it?
Great question. In terms of the media, local media did pick up on it. As a matter of fact, if you take a look and you kind of narrow your time range of search down, you'll see a lot of states, schools were closing because of this widespread influenza outbreak or virus outbreak. They were disinfecting schools. I think 8 members of the Patriots football team got sick with the flu. For one set of time. I think it was like 2 weeks or something. There were hospitals that were making the news because their emergency rooms were overrun with people very, very ill. And they were saying this is the most brutal early flu season we've ever had. I mean, that's documented locally. So The media was covering it then, but not the way they didn't know. It's not like they knew that the coronavirus was here and they could have said, oh my gosh, nobody knew. But
it wasn't covered as a national story. It might have been covered locally, but I don't recall the New York Times or the major networks. Not a single piece.
No. And, that kind of makes sense in a way, too, because if you look at the data, the Northeast did not start experiencing this until February, March.
Okay.
So the Northeast, that's why we're seeing what we're seeing in New York right now, but we're not seeing it in California because California.
They've already gone through it.
Yes, precisely.
So, and where was the Trump administration?
Great question. And that's been frustrating me because this data is available to the experts there, the Faucis and the Birxes of the world.
Why didn't they give a phone call to Trump and say, hey, let's get going here?
We don't know what their agenda is at this point, and I have my questions about that myself because clearly they're not following science; they're following emotion with their recommendations, etc. However, if they would have done that, there could have been widespread production of this antibody test in parallel with the production of the test for the virus, and now we're in backlog trying to produce enough antibody tests so we can see how many members of the population have this and if there's herd immunity and can we reopen our economy. This is a knock on the Trump administration, in my opinion, because they really should have been looking at this data back when this started happening and using it to guide them.
Now, do we know if this virus creates a natural immunity if you've had it?
That's the working theory right now, is that like any other virus, your body will build antibodies to it and it'll make it nearly impossible for you to get this virus again, unless, of course, there's some sort of mutation or change in the strain, which we've heard like little rumblings about, but nothing solid. So I'm not even going to go there. I don't think we've had that yet. Right. So, yeah, I mean, most people would not get this again, which is why the flu vaccine is supposed to work, right? Because they're introducing this into your body so that your body builds up an immunity to it and doesn't get it again and can fight it off.
Right. And then the vaccine isn't supposed to be ready for another year and a half. So,
right.
Unless they put some kind of, and even then, I mean, those are dangerous things. I mean, you have to be careful with vaccines. So I wouldn't actually feel comfortable seeing people take a vaccine that's been sort of rushed through the market.
Agreed. I'm not a huge proponent of vaccines myself, and that's just a personal choice. But
me too.
But if you take a look at the financial connection between Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates, Dr. Birx
Oh, okay.
and Bill Gates. You're seeing a pushback on the drug that is very, very inexpensively produced that can treat this virus
And what
versus
is that, the hydrochloroquine?
hydrochloroquine, azithromycin
Right.
combination. Right.
You know
And
something? I think you've got your finger on something with that, because I understand that that drug has been around since the 1940s. And yes, there are side effects that aren't great, but it's kind of a known entity, and you know who shouldn't take it. And it's cheap. You
yeah.
can get it for $20 a dose. I mean, for several doses. So the drug companies must not be too happy with that.
Well, the drug companies have a vested interest in the vaccine industry, obviously. But to be fair, the drug companies are donating millions of doses of this medication now. And I will say that I have personal experience because I have a family member who has lupus and has been taking hydrochloroquine for a year.
Right.
And the side effects from hydrochloroquine they're not really, let's take this for a week and get this into your system and blast this virus out. They're after long-term use, and the percentages of people who have those side effects, which are mainly vision issues, you have to be on, and the percentages are still so low, like 0.15% of the people that are taking this for 5 years will experience a problem with their vision. You need to really search for a negative in a situation where there are people very, very ill that could be taking this and doing well.
Right.
So, if you take a look at Fauci's pushing this vaccine, we shouldn't open anything back up until everybody's vaccinated. But he's connected to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which are doing this vaccine push.
Oh, yeah. And, Gates has been very open about that. I mean, he's done interviews where he says we have to have a national vaccine and we have to have a national test. And if you don't pass the test, you have to be, all that. So, I think that, and nevertheless, you have Governor Cuomo of New York actually asking the administration to send him down the hydroxychloroquine combination. And they did so apparently over the weekend. So you've got all the hospitals now getting that drug in New York State. And I think that if they put people on that drug and it turns out to be effective, and it probably will, then we're going to know that by this weekend, even though sometime next week, in which case, we have a game changer. We have a functional drug that can be used at least, I don't know, for people who are very sick, maybe not necessarily, if you just have a mild case. I don't know about that.
Well, it's when somebody gets this. So there's a lot of research coming out now. I've been reading medical research for the past couple weeks now. And, I'm not a doctor. I want to put a disclaimer on this. Obviously, I'm just a journalist. So I'm not a medical professional. But there's some compelling information coming out from some physicians in New York that are saying we're treating this thing incorrectly. And they're discovering how this virus works. And basically what they're saying is that it's starving the red blood cell of oxygen. Not necessarily the pneumonia causing people not to be able to breathe, but that the virus itself is starving the red blood cell of oxygen and iron and causing it not to be able to deliver oxygen effectively to the lungs and to the body, which is why you're starting to see organ failure and stuff like that. So the ventilator's going in and helping muscles to contract, but that's not what's needed. It's oxygen. And the way that hydrochloroquine works is in the same way. Malaria kind of acts the same way. So the hydrochloroquine goes in and strips the receptor from the virus to allow it to go into that red blood cell. And so that's what's causing the quick turnaround. Like your body's just getting the oxygen that it needs. And then the azithromycin is fighting off any bacterial infection that was able to settle into your lungs because your immune system is so downtrodden from the virus.
Okay, well, let's hope and pray that this works and that this is a viable thing. And you say that it can be used. It's not the kind of thing you can take as a preventative. You have to have the virus.
Actually, no.
Really?
Actually, no. There is some evidence that, if you take a look at the disease totals in hard-hit malaria areas where the widespread population is taking hydrochloroquine, those numbers are far, far below what you'd see anywhere else in the world. In addition, there's a number of doctors and nurses that have lupus. And those people, this is all anecdotal, but those folks are on hydrochloroquine or Plaquenil to keep their lupus under control. It's a very, documented, amazing drug for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And they're not seeing illness where some of their counterparts are. So there is talk of giving this to folks as a preventative.
Excellent. Well, good. And I know that it's already been used successfully in France and I think elsewhere. So, hopefully this will bubble up to the surface and we'll get to it. So I think there's an Israeli firm that just donated, what is it, like a million doses to the United States.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's out there and it's starting to ramp up in terms of manufacturing because there is some concern about people not having enough who are already on it.
Yep.
So those are all good things. So anyway, Tracy, what else are you working on?
Oh gosh. It's never a dull moment. There's other news going on at the same time as all this too. So I'm obviously looking into what Grinnell's doing at the DNI. I'm looking into what's going on with the next impeachment sham that will be coming out, right after this with how
They
Trump
already seem to be setting it up. You think they could at least wait until this is over?
They have no interest in waiting. No
interest.
My
goodness.
That's I think the only reason for this investigation is, political, obviously, but the problem is there's so much out there of these folks saying the opposite or acting the opposite of what they're accusing. So they're accusing Trump of not taking action quick enough, but they're telling everybody, don't listen to what the president's doing. Go out to the parade.
Oh, I know. I mean, Nancy Pelosi just finally on Monday got around to telling Congress and staffers that they could telecommute and they should do social distancing. I mean, hello, we've already had how many thousands of deaths? And finally. So, I mean, that's ridiculous. It's like you can point fingers all over the place. It's like not the time for that.
No. And I guess we could touch on a little bit of the politics going on in New York surrounding how they responded to the virus, too, if you wanted to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm originally from New York, so I have a bunch of sources there and pretty significant places. And I've been talking to them. And, basically the New York state budget was due last Wednesday. And they had a ridiculously large, about $6 billion Medicaid shortfall in New York State. A lot of the foot stamping that went on there was because they wanted money from the federal government. And this has been like an ongoing war between President Trump and New York. President Trump doesn't feel that the federal government should subsidize New York's bad decisions or New York's progressive policy and has refused to give them funds to do so. Including, removing their ability to deduct their property taxes from their federal tax return, which then, it shows the people of New York, well, wait a second, this is how much we're paying in taxes. It's a little bit of an interesting tack, but so Chuck Schumer and Governor Cuomo were arguing back and forth because Cuomo said, I can't believe you didn't put your foot down to get this money for New York State to combat this virus. No, they wanted $6 billion, which coincidentally is the same amount as their Medicare shortfall. Governor Cuomo was live in a press conference just last week saying that New York is broke and they're not interested in buying any more ventilators.
Oh, God.
So there's politics at play here, left and right. It's a very harrowing situation. I think a number of states in the early days declared disaster area or emergency declarations because they wanted the federal funds that were going to come from this. So it's like this mishmash of pork and politics and sickness, and it's horrible in my opinion.
No, I know, and obviously this big and enormous so-called stimulus, $2 trillion bill, no one's really actually read it, and I think it's interesting that it was on the. Oh, you've read it? Okay, we'll have you back because. I just thought it was kind of ironic that it suddenly appears on the desk right after this virus and they're ready to sign it. Nobody actually read it. So
700 pages.
Yeah, exactly. It's. I can only imagine who's getting what in that. I mean, all these various handouts to special interests. Anyway, Tracy, listen, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. We'll do it again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Again, mention your website.
UnCoverDC.com.
All right, Tracy Beanz, thank you so much.
Thank you.